Well, you might say 2009 is the year of white-collar crime, and Marc Dreier's may have been one of the most bizarre. Dreier was convicted of a $400 million fraud, and he just opened up to Vanity Fair's Bryan Burrough about how he did it. And Bryan joins me now, and thanks for coming on. I read the story this morning, your article, riveting, really riveting in terms of what he said. First of all, sum up for me, it's incredible that he basically said that he started this $400 million fraud because he wanted to buy a beachfront home.
Well, that's pretty much it. Dreier just came clean. He was on his way to prison, and he wanted the world to know why he did what he did. In a nutshell, he, during the 2001-2003 timeframe, was going through a depression. His life was falling apart, his law firm, his marriage, and he wanted to make himself happy. And so, while walking on the beach one day in the Hamptons, he decided he wanted a beachfront home as opposed to the home he had inland, and the best way he could decide to do this was to begin stealing large quantities of money.
Right, but of course the home was just a symbol, as you say, about what he wanted. He was already, 50 years old at that time, and he decided that he wanted to make something out of his life. I mean, you have interviewed many financiers in your illustrious career as a writer. I mean, what was different about Dreier?
Well, what was different about Dreier is I've interviewed my share of white-collar criminals on the way to crime. This guy had a level of candor and self-analysis that I had not seen before. I mean, who really realized that there was not a single person to blame but himself. That's somewhat unusual. This was a guy who thought he was going to be a failure, who had always been dressed and styled for success, a Harvard law guy. And when he was not a success, he began to steal from hedge funds and from his own clients.
But what puzzled you the most? Because there's a lot of twists and turns in this story. I mean, the fact of the matter is, at that point when he was pretending he was an attorney for the Ontario, was it pension fund?
Yes.
I mean, what made him turn around and turn himself in? When at that point he was near the airplane, he could have taken off and gone off, and nobody would have been able to find him, at least in the time being.
This was a guy, a litigator, who always thought he could talk himself out of everything, that somehow it had always worked for him. And he thought by going back in and talking to the cops, he could get himself out of it. But this was a guy who he could have gotten away any number of times. He was in Abu Dhabi a month before this with $8 million in his bank account.
Right, he could
have run, but he didn't. That's no life for a 57-year-old man.
Why did he decide to come clean with you?
I think because he knew that he was going off to prison in all likelihood for the rest of his life. This is a man with a considerable ego, who's wholly aware of everything that has happened to him.
Did he pick you, or you? I mean, how did that work?
I went in partnership with 60 Minutes.
Okay.
The 60 Minutes piece will be on this weekend.
Okay.
He is a man with an ego. He wanted the world to understand him, not necessarily to like him, but to understand that he was not some comic book villain, but that he was a man who went badly astray.
And what about some of the people who got caught up in his scheme, including Sheldon, Solow, the real estate mogul? I mean, what's happened to him?
Well, he was, I don't want to say not a victim here, but it was all of the thievery was done in terms of Solow's debt. Solow didn't lose money by that happening. For him, it was essentially just an image hit. No, I mean,
his name was tarnished.
The victim here is Marc Dreier, a group of hedge funds that many people will not shed crocodile tears for.
Wait,
and
did I just hear you say the victim is Marc Dreier?
Oh, clearly. I mean, the biggest victim here, the person that's going to prison, is himself. I mean, no one was hurt here more than Marc Dreier, as well as the 200 and 350 people at his law firm who lost their jobs.
Well, I might argue that the victims are his family,
Certainly.
Anyway, okay, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. Bryan Burrough of Vanity Fair, and the November issue of Vanity Fair hits newsstands in New York and LA tomorrow and nationally on October 6th.